And welcome to This Week in Worcester podcast. I am Tom Marino, editor of This Week in Worcester. We have something different today. We are here with Steven Schimmel, who's works locally on Israeli advocacy and work related to the conflict. He is appearing on his as in his own person and not affiliated with any groups he might be affiliated with. And he is unexpectedly in transit with his kids, so we have a live studio audience on his end. Hey, Steven, how are you?
Hey, doing great, and thanks for the cooperation with these two in the back. But I think we'll be all right. They're usually troopers when we do this sort of thing. So, with any luck,
Understood.
We'll be good.
They probably have better insight than we do anyway.
Sometimes I think that.
So we're going to discuss the very contentious topic of the current conflict in the Middle East. And we're not going to be contentious about it because that's how a conversation should be.
Right. And when we met before to chat a little ahead of time, I think that it was clear to both of us that we're reasonable, thoughtful people. And as I think I said during that conversation, I think we've got more in common than we might have expected. And I think it's always good to talk through these complexities. And there's no doubt. Plenty to talk about, plenty of subject matter there, and I look forward to chatting with you. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, thanks.
No, I appreciate you doing it. I certainly wanted to see a conversation somewhere, anywhere on this topic that doesn't turn into a toxic mess, and apparently we had to do it ourselves.
Yeah, too often. Well, that's the world we live in today. Find an issue, and you're going to find two people willing to bat each other over the head for it. So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I thought I'd open with, kind of framing at least my position. Israel is a fact. It's not going to go anywhere. Anyone that suggests it does, I think, is silly, to say the least. Probably deserves much more stronger language than that, but nonetheless, it's not going to go anywhere. What happened on last October was horrific, certainly chock full of, war crimes and all sorts of other crimes. Shouldn't have been done. I do have significant problems, however, with the way Israel has conducted itself in its response. And so, I just kind of wanted to frame at least where I'm coming from, so we can avoid, I think, a lot of the conversations that turn very hyperbolic, people chanting about erasing Israel or other anti-Semitic stuff that is, not necessary for this conversation.
Well, I think that those are all thoughtful. That's a thoughtful approach to this. I think it's funny too that you had reached out in the first place to have this interaction, which I think came from a tweet that I had written back in 2020. And it said something like, I'm willing to argue maybe, I don't know if it was the legitimacy of Israel or the validity of Israel or something like that. Yeah. And I think that for me, at the core of the issue is that despite your statement that Israel's here to exist, and I don't know if you say it should exist or it is here to exist, there is still a prevailing narrative that Israel should not exist, that Israel should be taken off the map. Israel can and will be with enough pressure, with enough fighting, both whether that be military pressure or diplomatic pressure. And from my perspective and the perspective of a lot of Israelis, October 7th was yet another indication in a very long line of incidents, to use a term that may be inappropriate for that have happened over the last 100 years, dating back before the State of Israel was founded and continuing on to this day as the prevailing and pervasive thought in the region. I would argue that a lot of what has happened basically comes from that. I think that it's an unwillingness to have a Jewish state side by side with Arab neighbors. And if you look back at history, I think you see all of these different, very sad, unfortunate, and depressing moments when I think we were perhaps on the verge of having a much better situation than we have today. That was rejected for whatever the particular reason was at that time, and I see that as the main. I see that as the overarching and foundational cause of what we're viewing today.
Yeah. So, there was a period in the 90s where violence, at least for a couple of years, slowed to a near crawl. In the greater context of the conflict, it was abnormal to have such little violence over that couple of years, and that was, in my view, because there was actually hope for some sort of resolution, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I think that groups like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, etc., on the Palestinian side will probably always exist. It's a matter of what kind of support they can garner, and when the situation gets worse for them, either physically safety or politically, whatever is going wrong from their perspective, I think that's just bulletin board material for recruiting, right? I mean, people in, this idea that, I think that Hamas is going to be wiped, is eliminated, I think is probably unlikely and somewhat pointless, because there will just be another group that is preying on, reaction to what's going now, right? So if it's not called, if Hamas renames itself today, does that end the conflict? No, that's it's ridiculous. But I do think that there's also somebody in the West Bank that probably is a reasonable partner for making progress to some sort of final status, and he's just been completely sidelined.
Let me start back to Hamas, because I think you're right that Hamas is a very, very difficult monster to defeat because it's an ideology. It's difficult to defeat ideologies. I'd also, though, and I bring this up sometimes when I talk about this conflict and history, there certainly have been times, like with Nazism at the end of World War II, the Japanese imperial, the mindset of the Japanese Imperial Army, where there was a similarly deeply entrenched ideology that was so overarching and overwhelming that some people may have thought, oh, it'll never go away. And I think you could even say the same about the Confederate South during the Civil War. And there's no question that we see vestiges of that today, sadly, and very condemnable. So, yeah, I don't disagree with you that the defeat of Hamas and the defeat of that ideology is a long shot, major long shot. But I think that there are examples in history whereby we can look at that, see the model, and maybe make that work. And we also have to keep in mind that the peace that you were pointing out in the 90s, throughout the time that the peace talks were taking place with Yitzhak Rabin and so on, Hamas intentionally was launching suicide attacks in hopes of torpedoing those peace deals. And there were a lot of Israelis at that time who really dug their heels in and say, how can we make peace when this is going on? And it only takes one suicide bomber to destroy the whole prospect for peace, which is it's so fragile. Peace is really, really fragile, and it's going to be hard. And Yitzhak Rabin at the time told Israelis, he said, you have to come with me on this. It's going to be painful. It's going to be difficult. And the same thing with 2005, the disengagement from Gaza by I think it was Ariel Sharon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Same thing. It's a huge risk, and sadly, the result of the disengagement from Gaza ended up playing right into the hands of everyone who says, oh, we'll never have peace with the Palestinians, or right into the hands of Hamas, who said, look, now we have a launching ground for more terror attacks. So, what do they say about the Middle East? It's always the analogy of the scorpion on the camel's head crossing the river. Sometimes you think you have it, and at the last second, it all crumbles before you, and it only takes a small incident to burn the whole thing up, and that's sad. It's
Yeah, for sure. I think certainly Rabin and to some degree Ehud Barak. I mean, Barak wasn't Rabin, right? But I mean, he was of the same, I think, mindset. Is a lot different than the governments that have existed since Sharon and on.
Sure. Oh yeah. No question that there's been a rightward movement in the government, and there's been a march right also in the way a lot of Israelis think. But I'd say that tragically, that is because they're out of the frustration of I think 2005 to a large extent, and certainly since October 7th, but perhaps before that even. But that's not to say that there isn't still a huge and probably the overarching feeling in Israel still is that the preference is to have, well, there's no doubt, preference is to have peace, prosperity, to have something that works. But the hope that you alluded to earlier, I don't know if people have hope anymore. They don't know where this will go. They don't know what the future holds, and they really don't see a way out.
Yeah, I mean, look, that comes with leadership, I think, and the ideological disposition of the current leadership for sure. And I think that really applies to the Likud party as a whole. Menachem Begin wasn't exactly who founded that party, for viewers. Wasn't exactly out there looking for a deal, right? I mean, his perspective was, the first line of their charter when they founded, I think it was 1978 when he founded the party, was only Israeli sovereignty, ironically, from the Jordan to the sea, which is now a thing we hear from the other side quite a bit.
But at the same time, as was the case with the opening of China by Nixon, sometimes when you have a hard liner, you're able to make the concessions that are needed to have peace or an opening. And it was Begin who signed the peace treaty with Sadat. But I don't want to. I'm no apologist for Likud. I happen to have a lot of issues with Netanyahu. I think Ben Gvir and Smotrich are purposefully difficult people to be way too kind. They're incendiary. They say deplorable things. So, but at the same time, quite often you have to have a hardliner to have legitimacy when it comes to making concessions. And that's like the last glimmer of maybe hope that I have, that perhaps something could come out of this that would be workable. But you also talked about the Palestinian, I think you were alluding to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. I continue to see a lot of problems with the PA as well. And I know that group really well. I'm friends from college with the chief negotiator's son, Saeb Erekat, who had passed away. The Palestinian Authority to this day still pays not ransoms, but pays for terrorists
Death
who
benefit or whatever. Yeah.
There's still a lot, like the textbooks that are taught in PA-run schools don't teach coexistence. They teach that with enough patience, with enough work, with a long enough timeline, Beersheba and Jaffa and Haifa will be liberated. And I pick those three cities because among any peace deal, I mean, those are well within legitimate Israel confines.
Oh. And we were interrupted. And you're back. Yes. Now you're gone. Now you're really gone. We will wait a moment. I'm sure he'll be back. And you're back.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
It's like that moment in Forrest Gump when he gives the speech on the National Mall and the plug gets pulled, and then he says, "That's all I have to say about that." Look, within this conflict, you have to find the partner who's most willing to work with you, even if it's someone who's still undermining the peace effort. The Palestinian Authority is far, far, far from an ideal partner to make this work. You see glimmers of hope here and there, to again misuse that term, but you have textbooks, you have society that's still way too focused, not on the idea of coexistence, but on the idea of quote unquote liberating Palestinian lands, which in their parlance is Jaffa, Haifa, Beersheba, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, but that rhetoric was much different at different stages of the, of the conflict. I mean, when Arafat, was no, was no quiet boy by any stretch, but when he was meeting with Rabin, and by all accounts, they became quite friendly over the years that they tried to work together. The rhetoric from the top was different, and thus, I think the rhetoric from much of the society was different, right? On both sides. And in Abbas, the current leader of the PA, Israel's done everything to sideline him. I believe, and this is my, call it speculation, and that's probably accurate, is because he actually is somebody who, I mean, he's the first person in all of whatever you want to call it, either in Arafat's organization back in the day, whether Fatah, which is the party, or the PA, which came later. I think it was early 70s. He was really the first person of note on the Palestinian side to openly be calling for peace, which at that time was, probably dangerous to his safety. And has long, been a subscriber to, kind of Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent resistance type of activism rather than armed resistance, and also has taken a lot of flack for that as well. And I think that those two things, if you're coming from an Israeli perspective where you do not want a settlement, where you want everything for yourself, or everything for Israel, that I think that represents possibly a threat to the end of the game here that you really want to get to.
Well, let's assume for a minute that what you're saying about Abbas is true. I don't know if that's the case, or Arafat. I know that Yasser Arafat, when he was in the midst of negotiating Oslo in the early 90s, it's well quoted, at least. I don't know about well documented. My Arabic isn't good enough to know that when he would return home, what he was telling the people quote unquote, was that, look, I'm signing a peace agreement with them now, but in the long term, do not fret. Our aim is still the liberation of historic Palestine. I don't know about Abbas. If that's the case, great. But I think that you're right to say that Abbas, and I think at this point in particular, if Abbas signs a peace deal with Israel, that's the end of Mahmoud Abbas. Similarly to Sadat. I mean, there was a reason that Sadat was assassinated, and the Palestinian Authority is viewed today as a collaborator entity within Palestinian society. It's ironic that in the 2006 PA elections, I think that was when Hamas won the plurality of the seats, which was right after Israel had disengaged from Gaza. So these are moments where you say to yourself, okay, well, here's a great opportunity. Why wasn't the partner for peace elected at that time? I look back at those moments, and they're shocking indictments of where things are.
Well, there's reasons for that, though. I think it's pretty clear as Arafat got older, his control over the PA certainly, his ability, the political instincts or the political abilities that he had when he was younger, I think started to dwindle, and that led to a lot of corruption within the PA. I've heard the phrase, while Israelis were building settlements in the West Bank, Fatah leaders were building villas on Gaza, on the coast of Gaza, right?
Building apartments in Paris.
Yeah, right. I think that was, I am remiss to say that there was this rightward shift to militancy, that all of a sudden, we want Hamas to be the thing. It's well documented. Hamas began with handing out food, and with they're kind of famously now known mobile medical units, right? They're going around providing medical care.
Yeah, that if I can interject there, that's the Muslim Brotherhood model. The same thing goes on. The same thing with Hezbollah. You provide the social services, you control society, and obviously you're going to garner the support of the people who you're helping. So
yeah, well, I think it's I think it's even simpler than that. You provide things that people in need, your popularity will grow, right? Hey, those people fed me. I believe what they say because I was hungry before they said it. So I think that what turned into is certainly by the end of his life kind of widespread corruption in Fatah and the PA led to what was certainly not inhibitive to Hamas's growth, right?
What do you think about Arafat's role in the Second Intifada? Because Arafat was still the head of the
PA. I think that the election of Sharon was a signal. And I think he responded maybe the only way he knows how. I mean, that man, Sharon was not going to talk to him. That was never going to happen. Ariel Sharon had a long history of being, I would call it a militant, probably, and was instrumental in probably the worst episode in Israeli history in Lebanon, Sabra and Shatila. And to see him, elected, I don't think there should have been any illusions that the peace process was dead. It was.
I don't remember the years, and I can't tell you.
2000. He was elected in 2000.
Yeah, I understand. Right. I knew that it was around 2000, but I also think that around the same time that there was a proposal put on the table for one of many proposals put on the table for for a Palestinian state, so to speak. And I can't remember. I lost track of whatever it was at that particular time. And again, Sharon, for all of his, and I'm not a Sharon, I don't want to be a Sharon apologist at all, because I'm, not a fan of him. But it was Sharon also, if I'm not mistaken, who disengaged from Gaza. So, there's nobody out there, particularly in this conflict, who has the moral, high ground or purity. No, that's just the case.
I argue that every time I talk about this subject, when neither side of it gets very, we're the right ones. Everybody's got their fair share of blame here. That this thing is still
everybody believes themselves to be right. No, I think so. I would put a lot of blame on Yasser Arafat for not containing the Second Intifada, and at the very least, not containing it. And there are some people who would even say that he was working behind the scenes to sort of encourage it. I don't know enough. I don't know enough of those details to know what is the truth with that. But it did rage for a long time. Left a lot of people. Injured and dead in that.
Yeah, for sure.
From those immediate consequences of it, but also the long-term consequences of it were that it made peace far less likely down the road.
Yeah, for sure. I see. I don't, and people get very upset with me when I say this. I don't see a whole ton of daylight between uh, Hamas and Likud. I think that they have had a very kind of co-symbiotic relationship over especially the last decade. I think that provocation that turns into violence is good for both of them and their ultimate aims. And that they've, I'm not saying that they've had a partnership I think that their interests are somewhat similar in the sense that violence is good for them. When the Palestinians caused violence, like on October 6th, I think that largely played into Netanyahu's hand and his ultimate goal here, which is annexation of the West Bank. Similarly, I think we're seeing pretty open signs that Hamas thinks that this is, in the long run, good for them.
I'll respond as if that's a legitimate argument to make, because I think that that's wildly untrue, that there's a similarity between them. I mean, it's like a flashbulb versus Hiroshima. You're talking about two very different worlds. But better to analyze it and explain. So Israel's position, or Likud's position on the West Bank, and primarily what Netanyahu's opinions are on this. And I'm speaking what he's saying. I'm not endorsing it, and I'm not
understood.
Just to make it clear. And everything that I've said today, I just also want to make clear I'm not speaking on behalf of any organization, as you had said before, or its members, or anything like that. When Netanyahu says we need to maintain control of the West Bank, or I will never allow a Palestinian state to exist, which I think he may have said that at various times. That is strictly out of what he believes to be, or what he says to be, concerns over security, not over this concept that we should have greater Israel. And I think that that's what Likud. I think that that's what Likud was trying to say, or was saying, when they say these other things that you pointed out earlier.
Yep.
They're strictly. I think that what Netanyahu is saying, and when he explains it, is that it's about security, because the West Bank, which has been offered up in various peace talks from time to time, almost in its entirety, with the exception of the city of Hebron, really has less. I mean, it's not like it has no significance, because biblically it's significant as the sites of all of these things that happened in the Torah. But outside of Hebron, which is one of Judaism's holiest sites, there's not an insistence that becomes part of Israel. Now, the settlements that are along the Green Line, there's a pretty strong insistence that would one day become part of Israel. But you're talking about a pretty small percentage of land that captures a pretty huge percentage of the population. The biggest intractable issue that you really have is Jerusalem and the refugee issue. Those are the two issues of this conflict at their core, because Israel sees a need to maintain an undivided Jerusalem as its capital. And of course, if you had Palestinians coming to their villages, or their relatives coming back to villages from 1948, you would have a completely different country, let alone the fact that these are groups who have complete hostility to Israel. So those are the two intractable issues. Everything else is sort of peripheral, important, but peripheral.
So Jerusalem Post this week reported that Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and Smotrich are planning the annexation of the West Bank in the event that Trump wins.
I have no idea whether that's accurate or true, or what they're planning on, or what that would look like.
Which will be bloody as hell if that happens. It will be bloody as hell.
Not sure that I know what annexation means. Would that mean that Palestinians living in Area A would become under
So
Israel's jurisdiction. Without knowing that, it sounds on the surface like something that would be a complete disaster.
So and I think that's really we maybe some difference on our between us on our belief that the goal for Likud type, certainly not all of Israeli society, but the Likud party, is that it will all eventually be Israel. Netanyahu was before the UN, I think it was last September, either September or August of last year, and displayed a map that showed Israel as it was titled the New Middle East, and it showed no differentiation. So I think to me that's screaming confirmation of the kind of original Likud platform of only Israeli sovereignty. And then it's what do you now you have, as you said, a demographic issue, and what do you do about that? And
what do you do about it?
The answers aren't good.
You have you've got different proposals, and again, I'm not endorsing any of these, and I'm only reporting them, not saying that I think that any of them make sense. You've got Caroline Glick, who's an Israeli thinker, for lack of a better term, who advocates for one binational state where you'd have Israeli control of the area. And there are a lot of Palestinian activists who advocate for one state, with equal rights, equal votes. Now, I have no idea what they would have in mind with the refugee crisis, for example, because that still is a major part of it. But yeah, there's been a lot of talks. There's been a lot more talk from both some Israeli thinkers and from Palestinian activists who call for that. I can't see how a crisis that's existed for the better part of 100 years, whereby you have two competing national voices, two narratives, somehow coming together in a way that would work. I just
seems far-fetched. I agree. I think it seems far-fetched, and it would eliminate the Jewish identity of Israel, because now you have a demographic situation that is not that is close, right?
Or you have some kind of situation like Saudi Arabia, whereby citizens of a certain religion, this in this case Jewish, would have a different citizenship level than others. I think that's probably discussed by some of the people who propose this or who are concerned by it. So that's one of the reasons why all of these politicians need to be incredibly careful about how they say and how they act. Any talk, first of all, Jerusalem probably is the tinderbox. Like any conversation around Jerusalem always can create all sorts of issues within the Palestinian realm and within the Arab world in general. The October 7th attack was called the Al-Aqsa flood. I mean, talking about Jerusalem. Look, Ariel Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount in the early 2000s is viewed by Palestinians as being the cause of the Second Intifada. That was
I think that's not. It certainly got worse as time went on, but I mean, there was a pretty instant reaction to that from Palestinians, and I think you'd agree. Sharon did it because it was intentionally provocative.
I don't know enough around it to know what that is, but I know when Ben Gvir and Smotrich visit and talk about those things, they're trying to say, look, we're again, this is what they're saying. They're saying we're here and you're going to have to just live with it. But remember Israeli history between 48 and 67, and this is I think noteworthy. When Jordan captured Jerusalem in the Israel's War of Independence in 48, from 48 to 67, Jews could not visit Jerusalem and the holy sites. They were bulldozed. But synagogues and cemeteries were bulldozed. Jews could not access it. 67 happens. Israel captures Jerusalem, captures the Temple Mount, and within something like 72 hours, if not sooner, Israel gave control of the Temple Mount back to Islamic authorities. very quickly in an effort to show, no, we're not here to control it. We we recognize what this is, and I
Yeah.
think that's also important to note, because Israel, if it was any other power in the Middle East, it wouldn't have gone that way.
Sure. Sure. Um, I I get that analogy. I just I don't look to governments in the Middle East as my example of
No, me
awesomeness
either.
either.
Me
Uh,
neither. Way, absolutely not. Right. But I'm just saying that in that neighborhood, things like that typically don't happen, and it's when Israel does it right. I think it's important to note that, but also I think it shows what Israel's intention is. And if Israel intended at that point to capture and control the Temple Mount and to stop uh, Palestinian and Muslim worship there, that obviously wasn't the rule that was implemented. And yet, time after time after time, that that talking point is used as a way to rile up the masses, to create this fear that the Jews, which is what the term is, in Arabic, they're not saying Israelis, they're saying the Jews are trying to take back Al-Aqsa. And it's that's like a weekly occurrence that they
yeah, I mean, look, I think people on both sides here like to latch on to the rhetoric of the most extreme and then play it as if that is the perspective of everyone, right? Um, so latching on to somebody like Ben Gvir who says, screw these people, let's just take it, and then that gets promoted on the Palestinian
well
side as
Ben Gvir is also saying, it's why is it wrong? This is again what he says, not my endorsement of it. He's saying, why is it wrong for Jews to be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount? Why are we not allowed to pray why are Jews not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount? Because that's the current status quo.
right. I mean, and that should be something that is solvable in some sort of final status, something, right? I mean, look, the day to pray is different. I think that seems like a thing that can be worked out. You don't the day of the week that you set aside for worship is different. That seems like that's not incompatible, right? In a world where people are sane, but I don't think there's many sane people in the mix of this conflict, right? Everybody's either fighting some sort of historical wrong, or from their perspective, or is coming from, especially at a time like this. I think a lot of this waned in the late 90s, but now or arguing from a position of militancy.
Well, it waned in the late 90s, but exploded in the early 2000s, and then there was another period of relative calm and quiet, basically that lasted up through the October 7th attacks. Sure, there have been flare-ups with Gaza over the last, with Hamas over the last few years, and you had a war in Lebanon also in 2006.
Yeah.
But things are drastically more depressing today than they have been in a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think another way to kind of spin the past versus present is suicide bombings are horrific. Walking into a pizza shop or some other public area and blowing yourself up and killing as many people as possible is horrific. I think it's not a moral statement, but just an observation. That hasn't last attempted suicide bombing was 2016 until last month.
Oh yeah, well, suicide bombing had been largely curtailed due to I think Israelis would point out that the security fence that was put up between the West Bank and Israel proper,
that's part of it, yeah,
has been a big success. They've gotten better at stopping that, and Hamas has turned instead to rocket attacks, really.
right.
And Israel would also say, and I think Israel says that without the military operations that they activate or engage in on a relatively ongoing basis in the West Bank, you probably would have more of that. That's what's said. I can't vouch for that one way or another, but that's what's said.
Yeah, I mean, I'm unaware of, at least in that interim period, from 2016 to last month, of reports of attempts or people caught or people stopped in the act of. I think, as far as we know in the public record or whatever, we went 8 years without an attempt, and I don't think it happened in a vacuum that last month there was an attempt to do that again.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that. But during that time period, and I was saying it was a relatively calm period of time. Totally was. I mean, obviously it wasn't the Intifada, and it obviously wasn't what you have today. But there were still over the course of the last, and I remember it because I talk about it on a weekly basis. There were knife attacks, and that had been the new like terror activity of choice. There had been knife and axe attacks that had happened mostly I think in Jerusalem over the last few years. That's what it had turned.
Yeah. I didn't mean, there certainly has been violence. Absolutely.
Yeah. I knew that you were saying. I knew what you were saying, but you're right. Yeah, the suicide attacks as a method of terrorism have not happened on the scale like they had years back. But of course, totally, very accurate, totally accurate.
And I would venture to say that it wasn't that Hamas stopped having a desire for these things to happen, right? I'm sure they would have been more than happy to continue suicide attacks. And I just look at that 8-year gap as an example of these things happen. Yes, do ideologues in Hamas want to kill all kinds of people as much as possible? Sure. But getting somebody to sign up for a suicide mission, I think is a product of desperation. And I think that that's at least, part of why you saw, an attempt last month.
I guess, but I'd point out that among the 9/11 hijackers, who obviously were suicide attackers, they came from well-to-do backgrounds. It wasn't that they were those who were suffering. I mean, it was very much that they had latched onto the ideological position of let's do this. But of course, yeah, if someone has less to lose, they're probably more likely to latch on to any kind of extremist thought. Anywhere in the United States, who are the people most likely to commit mass shootings? They always point it's the hopeless man who has nothing to live for. So you never, that is what you don't want in society. You don't want hopeless young people who are impressionable to have it. Now, in the sad reality that we live in today, unfortunately, you have a lot of ideology being pumped in to a group that faces that, and you have a real tinderbox of a situation. Everyone would say that throughout the Middle East, you have a tinderbox of a situation. So what does leadership look like? What will you see? What will prevail? If you have people saying, go ahead, risk it all. Let's launch 400,000 rockets from Lebanon into Israel. Let's launch another October 7th type attack. Let's do some suicide bombings. And you have Israeli, you have Ben Gvir, who says, let's confront this once and for all, and whatever type of
Smoltritz said something about we could be perfectly moral and just kill them all, but the world won't let us.
Horrific things like that. Yeah, does be any good. You really run some serious risks. Yeah, but I don't. Israel has these principles, and it may not be evident, certainly among those who hate the way Israel has prosecuted this war, hates the way Israel conducts the security apparatus in the West Bank, and all of that that there's a character. There's this what I think is a mischaracterization of the way that they handle things. Israel has these principles of combat, principles of operation, and yeah, of course, on a soldier to soldier level, you could have any number of terrible things happen or committed. But I believe, and I talked to you about this, I believe at their core, the intent is not to commit those atrocities. And I only hope that when the dust settles from all of this, that emerges as the way things played out in a very, very difficult, horrific situation, which is what I had said, when we got coffee, that urban warfare is terrible. Urban warfare, when you have an enemy combatant that is, for better or worse, among a civilian population. You have a civilian population that's working within the confines of this combat area. It's hard. It's horrible. It's impossible to conduct a war there in a way that any of us would think would be, oh yeah, nobody cheers that on. Nobody says, oh, this is just what we would want, including the animals on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think, like, really the core objection for me is, obviously before even the Israelis started responding to October 6th,
7th, yeah.
Hamas was saying, like, take all the hostages and just stay home. And that's probably not a reasonable position. But I mean, at some part along the way here, it seems to me that inflicting damage became more important than recovering the hostages, because they could have had them.
I would argue that it wasn't about inflicting damage. It was about I remember experts were saying in the wake of the October 7th, and I'm gonna have to go in a minute because I'm realizing that it's 3:26. In the wake of the October 7th attack, experts were saying that this was a particularly bad situation because you didn't just have hostages and you didn't just have death, but you had the combination of both. You had the combination of 1,200 murders and 250 hostages. So it made the situation for fighting back difficult. At first, Israel said, look, we want to wipe Hamas off the map. We don't want them to be in operation anymore. I mean, similarly to what the United States would have said during World War II, the Nazis will not exist anymore. As the war became this prolonged, protracted conflict, I think Israel's position among a lot of people was, we're going to end up having to live with Hamas retaining some semblance of power in Gaza. And that's a big conflict that the Israeli War Cabinet is having today, because there are some who say, no, we need to continue this to the end to get rid of Hamas. And there are others who say, nah, we need to pivot now and face what's going on in the north, or we need to do something a little differently. But the release of the hostages in return for those held in Israeli prisons was also a contentious issue, because you have prisoners in Israel who were implicated in terror attacks. So you've got that tension on this too. And again, it's incredibly difficult. And then you have the Philadelphia corridor, that strip of border between Gaza and Egypt. And Netanyahu is saying, well, if we don't maintain control of this, the tunnels underneath will continue to be used for smuggling. Maybe the hostages will be transported out of there to Iran. Maybe Sinwar is transported out. So you have all of these different points that are emerging as this has gone on, as to how this should be done. But I mean, it's a situation nobody wants to. Well, I can't say nobody, but it's a situation that I wouldn't want.
Reasonable people.
Yeah, reasonable people do not want to be in this situation, and it's tragic. It's a tragedy, and I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now. I have no idea.
I mean, and last things, I know you're going to go. Obviously Israel has the resources advantage, has the technology advantage, all of that, right? I understand that the attack on October 6th, and I'm not even pitching a conspiracy theory here.
Yeah.
My problem is that like there seems to be little examination of how 2,000 people crossed the border of what is supposed to be one of the most modern armies in the world. And something obviously went wrong. I'm not saying they intended for it to happen. I don't know that. I kind of understand that leap to judgment if you're not interested in facts, without leaping to that if you're not interested in proving it necessarily, because like what happened here?
It's perplexing for Israelis too, who aren't into the conspiracy. I mean, some of them might be into that, but it's perplexing also. I think the early indications so far from what's come out and what's been investigated is that one, it happened on a major Jewish holiday. So you already had that as part of the issue. Two, there was complacency. We've got this well taken care of. It's handled. Three, there was a serious lapse that left the intelligence apparatus not being listened to by the higher ups, because there was a lot of intelligence that something was amiss on the border. Everything from GPS and cell phone data that was being tracked to just general activity. But also, I'd say the sophistication of the attack was unlike anything that Israel had seen or was prepared for. Hamas had been training on mock-up Israeli villages and kibbutzim. They had workers who had been in Israel helping to map out what these areas looked like, where the safe rooms were. Hamas was able to hit the communications centers very quickly. And then you had all of this happening under the umbrella of a rocket attack that began at like 6:29, 6:30 a.m. So everyone took shelter thinking it was this normal attack, and it was able to play out that way. And all of these communities that were hit are also pretty close to the Gaza border. Right. I mean, they're right there. The Nova Festival, indications are Hamas had no idea that was going on. That's the music festival where there was like this mass slaughter. 300 people were killed there. The roads were blocked off on both ends by terrorists who had RPGs. I mean, they were really, really well armed. Everything, both from those who were part of the I can't remember the name of the soldiers from the Hamas brigade. It's just escaped my mind. But and then you had people who just came through on their pickup trucks too, as the situation unfolded. Epic failure, epic F up. That was what my Israeli friends were saying that morning when they wrote to me. And Netanyahu, this will be his legacy at the end of the day. Without it, when he is out of office, this will be his legacy, this failure.
Well, that can't happen soon enough.
The guy runs on, there are tens of thousands of Israelis who on a daily basis march in the streets.
Yeah. There is although an extreme minority for sure, I think at this point, there is certainly an amazing peace movement in Israel. I don't want to, pretend like there isn't. It is, there has been a rightward swing in Israeli politics over the last decade for sure. But there is an amazing peace movement
over the last year. And a lot of, sadly, again, tragically, a lot of those who were captured and killed on October 7th were among the advocates for peace, because they were sort of like in kibbutz farming communities. The people at the Nova Music Festival similarly. So, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking all around. And I just
would I
in the back, I say to myself, when they get older, I hope that they and the kids in the region are able to grow old in peace and prosperity.
Yeah, I just can't square at some point over the last 11 months, just take your people. And I understand that won't deal with the rockets. Rockets are dangerous, not air ordnance, right? I mean, they're fairly ineffective. They cause great trauma to the people that live in those areas. The casualty rates are compared to traditional warfare as we are used to, are very low because these things are very low tech.
Well, Israel has
but
to shoot those rockets.
shoot the most of them down. Right. But I just can't square in my mind. At some point in the last 11 months, just take your people and go work on your border because you have a big issue there, right? I just said it doesn't deal with the rockets, but
yeah, Tom, that's what a lot of Israelis are saying now. We'd rather look. Let's deal with Hamas later down the road. They've obviously been hit hard.
Yes,
time to get these people back while there's still a chance to have some of them alive. And there is an immense amount of pressure on Netanyahu to do that now.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw. I promised last thing. I don't know if you saw. ProPublica reported today that USAID determined that Israel had intentionally thwarted aid going in, and that was overruled by the Secretary of State, who then lied to Congress, and he should be impeached. But that's, I guess, another story. And that's that's what I mean. Especially that subject is the slow suffocation, it feels like, of the way the war has been executed is.
Well, there were definitely times early on where, I think it was for logistics reasons. Aid wasn't getting in the level it needed to, and I think that over time, as Israel is for whatever reason, there's more aid today. I'd put blame on Hamas for taking trucks, taking aid, holding it, and there are some instances in that. And I'd also say that there's, I don't know in the course of history when an army has been expected to feed the combatants that they're fighting against, and yet Israel does, and Israel is. Look, if Israel engaged in an effort to, create horrifying conditions like that, that would be unacceptable to most Israelis. But I think the dust of war has to settle before we'll know what the situation actually was and is. And I certainly hope, I hope that that's not the case. And I wouldn't think that it was, but this report, and there are going to be others that come out, and there will probably be conflicting reports on the other side, and we'll see.
Probably. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm certainly not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, I think that that's just terrific. But in the course
no, I get it.
In the course of war, horrible things happen. Delivering aid is very, very difficult. And you're dealing with something that's asymmetrical and unusual. And you've got Hamas that does their thing in a way that's also, and by saying they do their thing, they are willing to make things worse as part of their battle strategy.
Agreed.
So
I just one pushback there. No doubt that Hamas had seized some trucks and whatnot. But the idea that 40,000 people are seizing all of the aid for 2.3 million people is just not realistic.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent, but that's really said. It's something that's said, and I'll be looking to see how this was. Everybody's going to be examining this as time goes on. So that's just
so. Let's do this again sometime. This was. I hope we were at least while we disagree on a whole bunch of things. I hope it was an example that this conversation can happen without toxic nonsense.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Take care.
Yeah. Have a good one.